So I realized as I was preparing this that I had not actually introduced myself to some of you. So most of you know that I'm a nurse. Most of you know that my husband is a nurse. But what you may not know is that I also, because I was young and dumb, I double majored. So sociology is one of my degrees. And it answers a lot of questions from when I was younger. And when I would say, why? Because sociology is why. That's a lot of that question, right? So my poor parents didn't realize they had a little sociologist on their hands, and the why happened a lot. It also means like tracking trends and whatnot. So it kind of explains some of the background as to why I teach the way I teach, because it's like, why is that important for them to say? Why is that such a big deal? I want to know why. Why was that said at that time, in that place, all of those things. So fortunately and unfortunately, that's not happening today. So just some of it is, but not all of it. So the title of the message today is Valuing the Visionary. I had asked Pastor Josh if he wanted me to kind of take on one of the topics from 1 Corinthians. And so I am, to the best of my ability, and we'll see where this goes. Have any of you ever experienced an emergency? Like a true, oh my gosh, panic now emergency? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, so I'm trying to remember how many years ago, several years ago, I was living in Tacoma by myself. I didn't have my dog yet. Most of you know or have seen pictures of Willie. So cute. He's so adorable. He's so fluffy. Anyway, he's my buddy. We snuggle. So this was prior to me getting him. I was totally by myself in downtown Tacoma in an old building, which gave it lots of charm. There were wood floors, clawfoot tub, like all of these wonderful things. But it also meant that we had like a really old boiler. So great for hot water, not so great for, maintenance. It's old. It's over 100 years old. The floors creak. Huge fire hazard, right? The outside is brick, the inside definitely is not. So you're basically in a big box. And I work nights. I had for 10 years up until 2 weeks ago. So I was working nights, which means my sleep schedule was non-existent. I would be awake all night, and then I'd sleep part of the day, and then I'd get up because you still have to do things. You still have to grocery shop. People frown at you when you do that at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I would have these really funky sleep schedules. And this particular night, for whatever reason, I was exhausted, passed out, and at 2:30 in the morning, the fire alarm goes off. So I know, I'm exhausted. I think I had been awake for 24 hours prior to that. So you're doing this thing where you're like, wait, what time is it? Who is it? Where is it? What is it? I don't know what's going on. And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm in a firebox. I'm basically in a giant fire pit, and I have to get out. So I grabbed 2 items. Can anybody guess what those items might have been? Not my dog, obviously.
Phone and purse.
Phone and purse. What do you say? Phone?
Bible and phone.
Oh, Bible and phone. Any other guesses?
Pistol. Bible's on the phone.
Bible's on the phone. So we were combined 2. All right. So yes. Yeah, okay. What? Any other guesses?
Pistol.
Pistol? No. I grabbed my passport, which was in a cutout book because I didn't have a safe, and I grabbed my keys because in my head I was like, I got to get back in at some point, right? I left behind my phone, my wallet, all of these things, important papers, insurance, like all of this stuff. I left it all behind. And so after that I went, well, that was a good fire drill. Yeah. Okay, now I know. And I will have to adjust how I do this so that I don't miss something dumb next time, like my phone, so I could call my parents to come get me if in fact it had burned down. So little things like that. So I then put together this box of emergency paperwork, so I would have all of my all the important papers that I would need, and I had this mental thing of, okay, you have to make sure, keys are here, phone is here, all of that. It reminds me of The Office when they do the fire drill. Yes. It's one of my favorite episodes because you really see who cares about what. Like, handle the dog or cat, man. So, what do you care about in an emergency? And I will be totally honest. When it comes to our spiritual leaders, our visionaries, in an emergency, we think of them, right?
Yeah.
If someone goes to the hospital, if someone's having a hard day, if you're in crises of some kind, we immediately call our spiritual leaders, right?
Mhm.
But do we care for them? Not during that time.
Yeah.
Or are we only utilizing them during a crisis?
Mhm.
So we're going to talk about what Paul saw in Corinth, what they did. I'm a firm believer that nobody does it all the way right and no one does it all the way wrong. And so we're going to look at what they did wrong, and we're going to look at the only church that I found in the Bible. If you find another one, please let me know, that actually did it right. Okay? So we're going to start with 1 Corinthians 9. We're only reading 18 verses this time, guys. Don't worry. Last time was verse heavy. It's okay. Okay. It says, am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not the result of my work in the Lord? Even though I may not be an apostle to others, surely I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. This is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us, as do the other apostles and the Lord's brothers, and I think it's Cephas.
Mhm.
If you didn't speak in tongues, read through Chronicles, and you're going to feel like, read through the Old Testament. You're going to feel like you're speaking in tongues. That's good. Cephas. Or is it only I and Barnabas who lack the right to not work for a living? Who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat its grapes? Who tends a flock and does not drink the milk? Do I say this merely on human authority? Doesn't the law say the same thing? For it is written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. Is it about oxen that God is concerned? Surely he says this for us, doesn't he? Yes, this was written for us, because whoever plows and threshes should be able to do so in the hope of sharing in the harvest. If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? If others have this right of support from you, shouldn't we have it all the more? But we did not use this right. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel of Christ. Don't you know that those who serve in the temple get their food from the temple, and that those who serve at the altar share in what is offered on the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. But I have not used any of these rights, and I am not writing this in the hope that you will do such things for me, for I would rather die than allow anyone to deprive me of this boast. For when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, since I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. If I preach voluntarily, I have a reward. If not voluntarily, I am simply discharging the trust committed to me. What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel, I may offer it free of charge, and so not make full use of my rights as a preacher of the gospel. Sorry. I just realized I forgot to grab water. Okay, this is Paul writing to the church of Corinth, okay? And so to understand kind of why is Paul writing this? Why is he writing it to the church of Corinth? And like, what's going on? So let's talk about Paul. What do we know about Paul?
He preaches the gospel.
He preaches the gospel.
He had a past.
He what?
He had a past.
He had a past. What did he have a past? Yeah.
He was an apostle handpicked by the Lord Jesus himself, and he was a Pharisee of Pharisees.
Yeah.
Pharisee of Pharisees, right? Anything else?
Dual citizenship.
Dual citizenship. What else?
Apostle to the Gentiles.
Apostle to the Gentiles. Yeah. Yeah.
And isn't he a tent maker?
He is a tent maker. Yep.
He preaches, you sleep.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, and one of the suggestions that was given to me the last couple times I taught is that I needed to teach longer. My response is always, I only teach what God has given me, and unfortunately God filled the whole time this time, so I'm so sorry you're not getting out early tonight.
Yes.
Tonight. Hey, you know what? I'm still adjusting to day shift. It's fine. Plus we used to meet at church on Saturday nights, so it's really throwing me off
I
here.
know.
Okay, we know he's a Jew, right? We know he's a Pharisee. We find that out in Philippians 3:5. We know he's a Roman citizen. That's specifically, well, there's multiple instances, but Acts 22:28. He is present for Stephen's stoning and persecutes the church. So that's a good chunk of Acts, right? And he does it with precision, which I find super interesting. We'll loop back to that. converts to Christianity in dramatic fashion.
Yeah.
I feel a lot like Paul in this, in that sometimes when God's trying to get through to something on me, I have to be literally knocked off my horse or hit over the head with a 2x4, whatever we'll call it. It's kind of where he was at. He spends time in Damascus, which is his home, Jerusalem, Tarsus. He does 3 missionary journeys, right? So he and Barnabas go throughout like Asia Minor. Sorry, this is the part where sociology kicks in, and I'm so sorry. He goes throughout Asia Minor. Paul and Peter kind of meet up in Jerusalem and have a little discussion as to whether or not Jesus is actually for the Gentiles. Paul wins that discussion, which is why we're sitting here today.
Yeah.
Thank God for Paul. Then he goes out with Silas. And then we're going to kind of go through a couple of things. And the only reason this timeline matters is because it matters with the 2 churches. He visits Philippi and founds a church there. He visits Corinth. This is where we learn that he's the tent maker.
Yeah.
Where'd you go? There you are.
Yep.
Tent maker. We also learned that in Acts 18, but that's different. And because of Priscilla and Aquila, the power couple of Corinth, right? Paul visits Thessalonica. He lives in Ephesus for a while, helping establish the church and missionaries there. He writes 1 Corinthians during this time. So after he visits those churches, he writes 1 Corinthians. He visits Philippi again and writes Romans during this time. He goes back to Jerusalem because he's going to probably get killed, and completes his 3rd missionary journey. He goes back to Rome. He writes the book of Philippians during this time, and then somewhere in here, he writes, only 48% of the New Testament, no big deal. He spends time tent building, he gets jailed, he gets whipped, he shipwrecks, gets stoned to death, resurrection versus resuscitation, right? Walks back into the city, all this stuff, right? All of this to say that this is a spiritual leader, a visionary, who understands God's mission for the church, that the church is, like, he's the most Jew that ever Jewed, right?
Yeah.
He understands how this works. He is very systems minded. He's very, how do I say this? He understands how to make a plan and carry it out and execute it. We see this when he's persecuting the Christians, and then after he converts, God utilizes those gifts and talents and points it in another direction. And because of that, most of the church gets founded because of him, right? He writes most of the New Testament. He is someone who is incredibly spiritually gifted and valued, and is just an amazing visionary and carries out God's plan amazingly. Now, I'm sure there were things in there where he slipped and tripped and fell. We all do. But, like, when you look at it, he is on fire for God. He moves forward with purpose. He does all of these things. And so when we get to the first 3 verses of 1 Corinthians, he has been challenged, and not in an appropriate way. So there's some assumptions here when we're talking about spiritual leaders in general, because you may not be at this church all the time. So this isn't directed specifically for Pastor Josh and Michelle, because we have had people leave the church and come back to the church, and it's a very fluid body of Christ, right?
Right.
So this isn't singling them out. But he has been challenged in some way. He's saying, am I not an apostle? Am I not all of these things? And personally, and this is Molly speaking for just a moment, I don't care, like, if you've placed yourself under a pastor or a spiritual leader, I don't care if you have more degrees than a thermometer, you are submitted to them.
Amen.
Right? I don't care if you used to, like, change their dirty diapers. You are submitted to them, right? So it doesn't mean that you can't ask questions. Like, hey, I am not understanding this. Seems to contradict something else in the Bible. Can you help me understand this? Or come to them with tough questions. That's not what that means. And one thing I love about Pastor Josh is he's very open about, hey, if you're having a hard time, come to me. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out, right? That's not what's happening here. This is like accusation being placed on him that you're not even this. Who are you to talk to us? That's a problem. It shows something's wrong with their heart, right? So we're going to talk about, and they're withholding from him as well. So we're going to talk about holistic care of our visionaries. And I don't mean holistic as in, like, let's all do yoga and, like, meditate together and do these things. That's not what I'm talking about. Holistic as in the whole person, okay? Because he addresses all of these things. So we'll start, and they're all intertwined. It makes it hard to tease it apart, but tried. Okay, so we're going to talk about mentally and emotionally first. So verses 1 through 3, Corinth is already questioning Paul's validity. He has to come out and say, am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus? Have I not done all of these things? An apostle is someone who saw Jesus Christ in person, in the flesh. Now, he says, have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? We have no way of verifying as to whether or not he actually saw them, but he's making the claim. Maybe he was a little kid, I don't know. But he's making the claim. The thought is that he never did see Jesus, but that he saw Jesus on the road to Damascus, and that was where that came from. But we weren't there, we don't know. So we'll just do that. He's saying he's a free man, that he's seen Jesus. This congregation that he's talking to, this church, is the result of his work in Jesus, and if nothing else, that should completely validate him, if nothing else, to Corinth. Yeah. Right? God is moving in that church because Paul was the visionary for that church and moved forward with purpose to guide that church. That should be enough that the Spirit is moving, because if God is not backing a pastor, the Spirit's not going to be moving, right? Or a spiritual leader. The Spirit's not going to be moving. So that's the church of Corinth. Let's fast forward to today. Does anybody know who Barna, or what Barna is, I should say? I see one head nod. That's okay. Barna, it's okay. We'll get there, everybody. Barna is a research group of religion in America. So they don't just look at Christianity, but they mostly look at Christianity. They did a survey last year as to why pastors were considering leaving full-time ministry within the last year. 42% of pastors said they were considering leaving ministry. The reason they said they were thinking about quitting, 56% said the immense stress of the job is a factor. So again, who do you call in an emergency? Probably your pastor, right? Amongst other people, like your parents if they're available, your spouse if they're available, like maybe the emergency involves your spouse, right? But for most of us here, we're going to be calling our pastor, if nothing else, to give them a heads up and say, hey, be praying. We're having a moment, right? So the stress of the job, and I'm not saying don't call your pastors or your spiritual leaders. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that it's stressful. Being a manager of crises is tough. 42% said that they felt lonely and isolated. 21% said that they do not feel respected by their congregates, and 6% said I don't feel respected by those outside the church, which should tell you the culture. You should be respected by your congregation, right? Your church, those that you lead. Who cares? Like, if they haven't placed themselves under you, it shouldn't be a big deal. 12% said I don't feel supported by my staff. So those that work in leadership with them, obviously a church this size, we probably don't have a huge amount of people on staff, but we do have people that operate in those roles. Tearing down leadership takes a toll. In the book of James, it says there's power in the tongue to steer a ship, and the whole thing gets changed by rudder, right? And have you ever noticed that pastors cannot seem to get it right when it comes to the court of public opinion? Spend too much time at church, but you're never available. They should share their pulpit, but we never hear from them. They're too tall, but they also should be short. Brown eyes or blue eyes, depending on the situation. Has a passion for working with youth, but needs to spend all their time with the older people. Like, it feels like a lot of times I can't get it right. And unfortunately, pastors' wives tend to carry the brunt of this. I called my mom because we've had multiple pastors through the years, and I was like, I remember this being a problem. And I remember thinking something as simple as what they wore. Oh, you're too fancy, or you're too casual, or you're too, what? Pick one. Yeah. Or don't pick one. Build them up, right? But in Numbers 12, again, this is more of along the lines of Corinth. We're going to talk about how to do it right later. In Numbers 12, Miriam and Aaron talk poorly about Moses and his wife, specifically that relationship. And God summons them to the meeting. I don't know if you've ever been called to the boss's office, but the sweats, right? Imagine getting called to the tent of meeting by God himself. I'm good. He comes down in a cloud and he reprimands them. And when he leaves, Miriam is leprous, which makes her defiled, right? There are consequences to those actions, to tearing down leadership, to speaking poorly, all of these things. We're going to roll into spiritually. Don't worry, I'm going to give you tools of what you can do, but because mentally, emotionally, and spiritually are very closely tied together, what we're going to do is I'll give you what you can do at the end of spiritually. So spiritually, our support to our leadership, any spiritual leader, has spiritual ties, both good and bad. So right, we just talked about Miriam and Aaron, like there were spiritual ties to that. Barna again. What's Barna again? A research company. 84% of Christians claim they prayed last week. Should that be 100?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, should be 100. They also did a study, and I find this to be super interesting, especially since medical field. They had physicians in a double-blind drug study. So double-blind, if you're not aware, is nobody knows, like the participants don't know if they're getting the sugar pill or the real drug, and also the people administering care don't know which one. So I've participated in these as a nurse, and it's really unnerving because you'll get like an IV bag with a very odd label on it where it's just like the name. You don't know what the drug is. You don't know if you're giving them sugar water or something that is a drug. And you're just like, hopefully we're not about to do something bad.
Yeah.
Right? So you have, and the sugar pill people are the placebo group. Okay. So patients were not prayed for in the placebo group and then prayed for in the drug group. Those in the drug group suffered less cognitive heart failure, required less diuretics and antibiotic therapy. They did this specifically with a heart condition. Antibiotic therapy and had fewer episodes of pneumonia, fewer cardiac arrests, and were less likely to be intubated and ventilated. So to have a breathing tube put in and breathe for them. Nobody knew it was happening. They just were given a list of names and said, pray for these people, they're sick. And that's what happened.
Yeah.
Of the 84 people who claimed they prayed last week, we say claimed because we have no way of verifying, right?
Yeah.
And if somebody asks me, of course I'm going to say, yeah, I prayed.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to pray. 56% prayed for their family members, 3.3% prayed for strangers, and 38% say that the purpose of prayer is intimacy with God. Now, not that we need science to tell us that prayer works, but there is scientific evidence that prayer affects our physical and emotional well-being. But what's missing from that list? Pastors. Also, what about small group leaders? Children's church teachers? Youth leaders? All missing from the list. Unless you're lucky enough to be a friend or family member.
Yeah.
Right? This is not, spiritually, this is not limited to prayer. So here's where we get into how you can, aside from prayer, we should always be praying for our spiritual leaders. But aside from prayer, here's how we can spiritually support our spiritual leaders. First one is to protect their Sabbath. So Exodus 20, 8 through 10, it says, protect the Sabbath and keep it holy. They're working on our Sabbath, right? This is their job today. They're in full game mode right now, right? They are pouring out and we are receiving. So when they do take their Sabbath, we respect that, right? So like if they go on a camping trip and you can't get a hold of them, it's okay. It's their Sabbath. And if I know Pastor Josh, he's already set somebody up for you to call and probably announced it, right? He likes to have backups, which is awesome. I respect that. Right? So respect the Sabbath. If they say, hey, this is our Sabbath day, we are going to respect that. The other one is be a good sheep, right? Jeremiah 3:15 says, I will give you shepherds after my own heart who will lead you with knowledge and understanding. So if he's a shepherd or a pastor is a shepherd, we need to be good sheep, right? Listening and following. Hold up their arms. So in Exodus 17:12, you have, I think it's the Amalekites, and Moses has to hold his hands up and he starts to get tired. I briefly considered having Pastor Josh come stand up here like this from the beginning of the message. I didn't do it Okay, but he has to stand and hold his hands up. He's keeping things at bay spiritually, and he starts to get tired. And then, Joshua and Aaron come in and hold his arms up, right? And then they get tired, so somebody else has to come in and hold their arms up. I don't know if you've ever tried to hold your arms up for an extended period of time, whether it's like working on a car or something like that. After about 3 minutes, you're like, oh man, I can't do it. It's a spiritual posture though, right? When we worship, we raise our hands. It's when we're doing warfare, when we're spiritually speaking, it's a posture, right? So whenever we're able, we need to be holding up their arms. And if somebody else is getting tired supporting them, then somebody else needs to come in and recognizing that someone else is getting tired, right?
Yeah.
See, my arms are tired. I had to put them down. Utilize your spiritual gifts in line with their vision. Don't just be a Mary, be a Martha too. This kind of loops back to where we were. It's incredibly important to be sitting at the feet of Jesus. Incredibly important. The currency of time. That's the one thing we can't get more of is time. Take that time. Spend it at the feet of Jesus, absolutely. But at some point, we have to get up and move. Yeah. So don't just be a Martha, be a Mary too when it comes to utilizing your spiritual gifts in line with what the vision they have is for the church. So what this doesn't mean, this may be a little bit controversial. What this doesn't mean is, I'll use preaching because I'm up here. What this doesn't mean is that you go, well, I can preach better than him, I should be doing that, right? Or better than me. A lot of people can teach better than I can. Like, just because you're like, I can do it better, doesn't mean that you're in line with their vision in doing that. Okay, so making sure that you're submitting your gifts to that vision, not trying to overpower. Be a dependable shield is the other one I have. So Ephesians 6:10-18 is the armor of God. If you were ever in Sunday school, I'm sure you made it out of paper and did all the things. The shield is the only mobile item that you don. And it is used in defense of not just oneself, but the defense of others. Right?
Right.
Being a dependable shield. No matter what, it is our job to defend the body of Christ.
Yeah.
Right? From the arrows of the enemy. Sometimes that means you gotta pray your pastor. So the best way I can think of for this is if you're hearing somebody tear down a spiritual leader, again, not just your pastor, anybody who's in spiritual leadership, you hear somebody sowing that seed or speaking that needs to be stopped. And it's incredible. It's hard to do with grace and dignity. I'm finding that out more and more since I took over a management position and they speak poorly over someone above you. You're like, yeah, I'm under the same directive they are. I'm so sorry. Mm-hmm. But we are going to support them. Whether you fully agree with it or not, I've put myself in that position. So making sure that you are defending your pastor and being a dependable shield. All right, physically, we're going to reread these again because the first 3 verses is very heavy on the emotional and spiritual portion of it. Now we're going to talk about how we can physically support our pastors. So let's read this again because I've read it a lot this week and I totally forgot. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us? Or do the other apostles and the Lord's brothers and Caiaphas? Or is it only I and Barnabas who lack the right to not work for a living? Who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat its grapes? Who tends a flock and does not drink the milk? Do I say this merely on human authority? Doesn't the law say the same thing? For it is written, the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading grain. It is about the oxen, or is it about oxen that God is concerned? Surely he says this for us, doesn't he? Yes, this is written for us, because whoever plows and threshes should be able to do so in the hope of sharing in the harvest. If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much to reap, or too much if we reap a material harvest from you? If others have this right of support from you, shouldn't we have it all the more? Is it this one? There's a version, I think it's the NASB. Oh, no, it isn't here. There's one that has like an extra word in it that talks about the soldier. It says something about like the soldier doesn't work without wages or something like that. Now, I don't know much about oxen. It's just not an area of expertise for me. And if it is for anybody in this room, I would be happy to hear about oxen because I'm curious about some of the things. What I do know is soldiers. I mean, I'm a married one, but I work with them consistently. And can anybody guess what a soldier's biggest concern is? We can do top three. What is their biggest? You can't answer. You know the answer. The biggest stressor for a soldier. Dry socks. Yeah. Maybe not so much in the desert. Combat. So physical safety, right? Any other guesses?
Being left.
Being left. Anything else?
Family back home.
Family back home.
The guidance of their superiors.
Yeah. Can you trust your superior officer? Yeah. Anything else? These are all great. These are all concerns, don't get me wrong. What is the biggest concern for a soldier?
When's chow?
That too. When do I get to eat? Well, that goes into the oxen portion of it. Don't. No, but really, what is it?
Safety.
You've told me differently. And the research says differently. He's trying not to say it. That's okay. Finances.
Yeah.
Finances is the biggest concern of a soldier. I didn't include it fully because it takes us down a rabbit path. But 2% of our soldiers are on food stamps.
Wow.
And 1 out of 3 pastors qualify for food stamps. So it should tell you something. Like, it's devastating to me that our soldiers could even potentially be on food stamps. It should be even more devastating that our spiritual leaders are in that position as well. But it takes us down a rabbit trail that I'm just not prepared to go down. So we'll re-navigate. So finances is their number one. Relocation is another. They're constantly on the move, right? Which pastors are pretty constantly on the move. The other thing is isolation.
Yeah.
Right? They feel very alone in their job. And they band together. You know, E4 Mafia shenanigans get real rowdy, right? I recognize that is a very niche joke. It's okay. That being said, 25% of Jesus' teaching in parables that I calculated, I could be off by a little bit, but 25% is pretty close. 25% of Jesus' teaching in parables are focused on money. He never takes up an offering. And he doesn't need our money. But could you imagine if Pastor Josh got up here and preached about money at the end of every month? He would be totally in line with God's teaching to do it. But can you imagine the amount of skepticism? Be like, welcome to our cult.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Feels weird. But finances is a big part of the church of God, right? We take up a tithe and an offering. It doesn't just go to keep the lights on in here. It goes towards benevolence. It goes towards, like if they have counseling sessions, being able to like help provide food for them while they do that. Things like that. Like as they serve, we're providing for them to do that ministry. But could you imagine if he got up here at the end of every month and was like, let's talk about money again. Different parable, but here we are. It feels weird. It feels awkward. Now, this is for me huge. I've had 3 major pastors in my life. I've had one that lived totally off of their church, the wages that they drew from the church, their paycheck from the church. I've had one that was bivocational, and then I've had one that took no money from the church. So when I say bivocational, I mean they took money from the church and they worked on top of it, Paul style, right? So I've had all 3. Now, what this means is whether or not a pastor chooses to receive financially from a church is not for us to decide. That's not our choice, that's their choice. Paul chose not to, then that's fine. Again, I've had pastors in all 3. All of them super effective and phenomenal leaders, so that's not the point. Corinth chose not to give, and even though Paul says that he's fine, it's the heart condition of Corinth that Paul is choosing to address and that we need to be aware of. So it doesn't matter. It is not our job to decide what a spiritual leader takes from the church. It is our job to make sure that it's available if they need it or want it.
Amen.
So, physically, how can we care for our spiritual leaders and our pastors? And this one's a little tricky because Like how do you, again, they're so intertwined. But here are the ones that I don't want to say I came up with, but the ones that I've kind of from scripture have pulled out. Spend time with them non-emergently, right? So isolation is a big thing. Like feeling like you don't have the respect, feeling like you don't have a connection. Ultimately, all that boils down to they're not connected. So even though they're trying to lead, there's a lack of back and forth, right? So spend time with them non-emergently, right? Well, I don't need you for anything. I just want to spend time with you. Is that okay? Right? So get to know your pastors, right? Your spiritual leaders. One of them is food. And I know that sounds really funny, but like there have been so many times and so many things where like through the years in the church where God has told somebody, hey, I'm going to need you to take groceries to this person. And have you guys ever heard the term grief groceries? Yeah? It's a great way of showing somebody that even though they're having a hard time, like you're thinking about them and very practically caring for them, right? So I'm not saying we just go start dropping off groceries at their house because, oh my goodness, could you imagine it's gonna spoil before we eat it. That's not what I'm saying. But it is a way to serve them physically without that has a spiritual type, but without being like over. If that makes sense. The other one is give them time together, right? So ministry is really tough on marriage, right? So you're pulled in 18 different directions. You're doing 18 different things, and like where do you spend that time together? So what that means is when I say give them time together is take on some of their responsibilities when appropriate. Okay, so it could be like, hey, I'd love to give you a date night. I'll watch the kids, or we'll watch the kids if it's you and your spouse, right? Something kind of like that. Like give them that time because that will really give them a break because that's really helpful. The other thing is, and this is kind of a combination, is to do communion with them.
Yeah.
So I have maybe a slightly different view on communion than is traditional in the church. I take it a little more literally. I don't mean that I actually think I'm eating his body and drinking his blood. That's not what I mean. What I mean is the representation of it. So when Chris and I got married, we did communion. And we did it with everybody because I saw it more as like a baby dedication.
Yeah.
Right? So when you dedicate a baby in the church, they commit to, hey, we will help you raise this child and we will come to you for help with raising this child in the ways of God. Right? We're married, but like we're gonna need help because we haven't done certain things, right? Being married. So like help us stay on the track and help, like it's a commitment for me. It is, and that is what communion is. And meeting with the body together and even just having food and drink together. Like grab a burger and a Coke. That's communion, right? But what it is the intent that you're meeting together because where two or more are gathered, what? He's there, right? So making sure that you're doing communion together, it's a physical thing that has very spiritual ramifications. So making sure you're doing that. Okay, let's talk about what Corinth. Well, so Corinth, we kind of hated on them a little bit. They really dropped the ball, right? They kind of didn't do so hot taking care of Paul. Well, neither did any other church, right? Except for one, and that would be the church of Philippi. So in Philippians, I read it out of the corner of my eye and I shouldn't have, I apologize. Philippians 4 verse 10, and we're going to read through 19. It says, this is Paul writing still, remember, he wrote, so hold on, let me back up, let me go back here. He wrote the book of Corinthians, but like before he ever went to Philippi, or after he visited Philippi, after he went to Corinth. He visited Philippi first and then went to Corinth. He wrote 1 Corinthians, and then while he was in Thessalonica, he writes the book of Philippians. So this is at the end of his journey, of his missionary journeys, at the end of his pastoring before he ultimately dies. So this is towards the end, which tells me he's taking all of this into consideration when he writes this. I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Yet it was good of you to share in my troubles. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you only. For even when I was in Thessalonians, does it say that up there too? Thessalonica, sorry, mistype on my part. Was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. Not that I desire your gifts, what I desire is that more be credited to your account. I have received full payment and have more than enough. I am amply supplied now that I have received from Epaphroditus the gifts that you sent. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God, and my God will meet all of your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ. To our God and Father be glory forever and ever. Amen. Only church in all of that work to share. Is anybody else just totally befuddled by that? Like, the percentage was so small. And Paul, which we went over, is like the ultimate visionary, right? Well, not the ultimate, but a great visionary and a great leader in the church. And they gave to him when he was serving in another church, which was Thessalonica. Thessalonica is the second richest city in the entirety of that region. And they still couldn't share or give. Really? And Philippi, up until this point, was not the richest church. In fact, they were on the poorer end of things. But after this, so it says, like, Paul ties that, like, this is an offering to the Lord. It's going to come back to you. Like, well done, kind of thing. After that, historically and economically, Philippi soars in economics. They become one of the wealthiest cities in the region. And it's in part credited to this, even with, like, non-religious historians. They're like, yeah, it's weird. After the church showed up, they suddenly were prosperous. It's okay. We'll let them have it. So it's incredibly odd to me that even in the wealth, and Corinth, which we've learned, was like a hotbed for all kinds of crazy things, right? There had to have been wealth there. We know there was wealth there because it's kind of like Vegas, right? So there was wealth there, and they still weren't sharing, and it says a lot about their heart condition. If done right, valuing your visionary has a spiritual blessing behind it for you as well. We see that in Philippians, where it says, God will meet all your needs and riches, right? So it's kind of selfish, but when we take care of our spiritual leaders, when we don't follow Corinth's line of thinking in challenging them inappropriately, in tearing them down, in not sharing what they have amongst them, and they were doing other things right. Again, nobody does it all the way right, nobody does it all the way wrong. This is something that they got wrong. But in Philippi, they got it right, and they saw the ramifications of that, which was prosperity and abundance. So all of that to say, we have to value our spiritual leaders. We have to value the visionaries that God has placed above us and that we have submitted ourselves to. And to care for them deeply because they care for us deeply. It is a biblical principle that it has so many ties to it that it's just phenomenal. So here's the other thing. As I was preparing this, I was trying to remember, especially during the prayer section. I was like, I pray for them at home. And like, we support them and, all of those things. But then I realized as a church body, I can only remember 2 times that we've actually prayed for our pastors here at church. And it was the day that they were placed in as pastors. They got anointed and prayed for. And the only other time was during Pastor's Appreciation. Once a year is not enough. Right? So I wanted to take a little bit of time to pray over Pastor Josh and Michelle, because these are our visionaries, right? God has given them a vision for the church. God has given them all those things. And no matter where people are, whether this is your home church or not, whether you're visiting or, you're going to go on to another church at some point, the application is still there. We have to value those visionaries that God has placed above us and that we have submitted to. We're going to pray for them. I'm actually going to embarrass them and have them come up here. Okay? Sorry. You guys don't get to get away with it. And I would love for everyone, well, not everyone, we can't all fit, but for, for people to come up and to pray for them. I think we have anointing oil over there if you feel like you would like to utilize that. But I want us to bless our pastors today. I want us to speak life over them. I want us to speak just God's protection over them. I want to build them up and to continue, to follow along those lines. Unfortunately, we're not gonna be, I didn't bring communion, so we can't do communion together, but at least mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, we can take care of some of that today, right? So I'm gonna scoot this back so we've got a little space behind them here. And I'll start us off, but then I'm gonna shut off my mic because this isn't about me. This is about valuing our visionaries. So, and I did ask one person in particular to come up and make sure that they pray for them. But yeah, please come on up.